Funhouse was a game show from the late 80s and early 90s. It was quite similar to Double Dare, where two teams of two kids each would compete in a trivia round, along with physical challenges to earn points, with the winning team competing in an obstacle course to win the grand prizes. 1991 was the last year that the show ran, but it was also the year that an NES game based on the show was released by High Tech Expressions. It completely forgoes the trivia section of the show, which you may or may not be a fan of if you think that this might be a boring aspect that doesn't translate well to a video game. But at the same time, it definitely takes a dynamic away from the game. So do we at least get some variety in the obstacle course portion of the game that was kept? Not at all. Instead, you're in a top-down view where you slide the player around the floor wearing roller skates with the intent of tossing tomatoes at targets, with the goal of hitting all of them, sometimes in the right order, before the time runs out. You clear a room, and it's on to the next one before you take down all 72 rooms of the house. So that's it? That's the whole game? Yeah, pretty much. Now, I mentioned how the show's format is a lot like Double Dare, and there was a Double Dare game on the NES, which wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but it did resemble the show. You had questions, you had physical challenge mini-games, and you had the obstacle course at the end. It wasn't a classic, but it did remind you of Double Dare. And since fans of the game show would probably be the only ones playing the game, the familiarity is a trait that you've got to have. Funhouse looks and feels like an unfinished prototype of a completely unrelated game that had the licensing rights to the game show slapped on it in mid-production, and some tweaks were made to conjure up a vague line of reasoning as to how this relates to the Funhouse show, which is a real shame because on paper you should be able to make a game based on this show that at the very least would be playable. But it's complete garbage. Like I said, it feels unfinished, and I don't even mean that it's lacking game modes and that's why it feels unfinished. The one game mode that is included feels unfinished in and of itself. The first big problem is the controls. It's so fucking slippery and jarring, and I know that you're supposed to be on roller skates, but I really think that was just inserted into the game description to excuse the shitty job that was done in the programming. And I know the intention is to make things more challenging, so you don't want it to be too easy to maneuver around, but it's fucking nauseating trying to keep this dipshit under control. And the mechanics are fucking weird too. You hold A to accelerate and use the D-pad to steer, like you're driving a fucking car, and then B tosses the tomatoes. Positioning yourself is a bitch because of the slipperiness due to these quote-unquote roller skates, which doesn't help with the aiming, so you're often finding yourself having to spin around and fire frantically until you hit your target. This should have been a clear sign that the concept is flawed, and it should have been scrapped in favor of something else entirely. The bad controls alone are a deal breaker. The game is pretty much hopeless at this point. And even if the controls weren't so dog shit, the game itself isn't fun anyway. Bouncing around playing connect the dots over and over again is about as bland a concept as anything that has ever been birthed on the NES. And there are 72 fucking levels of this shit. There's no way this is gonna hold your interest for that long. On top of that, the graphics and music are crap. Now, I mentioned the familiarity thing earlier and how games like Double Dare, American Gladiators, and other game show-based video games, for better or worse, do at least resemble their respective counterparts. And that's gotta count for something. But was there ever a point in the Funhouse game show where the contestants roller skated around the house, throwing tomatoes at targets in a specific order? I don't know, honestly. But even if it did, as one of the physical challenges or whatever, there's no way that playing this one mini game over and over and over and over again is going to remind you of the game show at all. At the end of the day, the game doesn't live up to its name, as it's no fun whatsoever. And that wraps up this edition of Aqualung's Game Reviews. See you next time.